Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Today, we speak with Lissa Appiah, founder at WeApply and certified career strategist and certified organizational coach. I talked to Lissa about how to succeed at work as an introverted or quiet leader and talks about building your own personal brand, leaning into your strengths, and everything in between. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Okay, let's go. Lissa, thank you so much for being with us today. You are the founder of WeApply and you help quiet leaders win at work. I love that. And you have such a rich background. You did public policy, HR, coaching. What drew you to make this leap into career strategy and personal branding in the workplace?
Yeah, as a teenager, I was always that person that people would reach out to get help to update their resume or to help prepare for an interview. And it was just something that came really naturally to me. I've helped my parents land multiple jobs and, cousins to get promotions in different places. And I didn't know that there was a field of career development.
Mhm.
But as time progressed, I actually had my son in 2018. And while I was on maternity leave, I was like, okay, I've had this business idea for a long time, or it wasn't really a business idea yet. It was more just like an idea.
Yeah.
I've had for a long time around career development. I had run a nonprofit organization for a few years where I was helping youth with their career development. But I was like, okay, I have a bit of time now. I want to make this into something real. So I started doing my research. I found out that there was a whole industry of career development practitioners, and I decided to get certified in 2019 here in Canada. And that is how the journey kind of began of figuring out, okay, like how do I position myself in this market and how do I make an impact and support others in their career journeys and realizing it's not just about the resume and the LinkedIn or whatever, but there's so much more to it. So yeah, that was the journey.
So basically, you're Superwoman. You had a baby, and then we're like, I'm gonna start a business in all my spare time of
Sure,
raising another
it's just
human.
a baby, right? I should
That's
find something
that's
else to do.
really that's amazing. And you have described yourself as someone who is quiet at work, and I
Mhm,
love that. How do you define a quiet leader?
mhm. Uh, the best way to describe it, I would say it's all about energy management.
Mhm.
So this is where, a lot of people get it wrong when they're talking about introverts. They think that being introverted means that you're shy, but those are two completely different things. It's all about how you manage energy. For people who are introverted or quiet leaders, as I call them, typically you get your energy from solitude. That's where you recharge, that's where you're able to gain your energy. It's not that we don't like people, it's just that we prefer to be alone. And obviously, when we do have opportunities to be with people, we are able to bring our best selves if we're able to recharge and get the time that we need. On the other hand, people who are more extroverted, they get their energy from people. They get their energy from the social events. That's what brings them alive. And they prefer not to be on their own. So depending on, the type of person you are, that's how I would describe it. It's more about energy management. And more I'm meeting people and they're like, I'm somewhere in between. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, interesting. So yes, they use the term ambivert. So yeah, there are some people who say they're somewhere in between. I feel like also just depending on the kind of work that you do, sometimes you learn how to adjust to different settings, but you tend to have that natural approach that works for you, even if you've learned over time how to adjust. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's interesting. I'm definitely someone who is more of an extrovert, but as I've gotten older, need more of that solitude time. I'm the person that can talk to a wall, at an event or what, which works well for my job and networking and all that kind of good stuff. Or if I'm at Target, after an event, I'm like, "Hi, how are you?" And I'm like, "I don't work here. You don't have to say hi to people." But I find that as I age, I need more and more. I call it rest, but it's really just that solitude piece. So it's interesting that you're seeing more people kind of identify with both. And as you were talking, I was thinking of Superman and how he has his fortress of solitude. And it's interesting, though. It doesn't seem like the workplace, and I guess it depends on industry, but it doesn't seem like the traditional workplace really values quiet leadership or maybe views it a certain way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and you're completely correct because a lot of workplaces were built around. There's a book called Quiet by Susan Cain, and she calls it the extrovert ideal. And it's basically this concept that basically our workplaces are formed or created for extroverts. This
Mhm.
idea that you need to network, you need to do team building exercises. There's this whole component of socializing in our workplaces that by default, when people are thinking of a leader, they're often thinking of that person who's charismatic, that person who's loud, that person who can get the room's attention. But the loudest person isn't always necessarily the one who's right, and it's not always necessarily the one who is the leader. And that's where so we run into challenges with the workplace because there's a bias sometimes where it's like, okay, that person is more visible, so that's the person who's doing well, and that's the person who can be a leader. And you see that so many times where you have people like that who do get promoted, but it doesn't mean that they have the people management skills. They maybe were brilliant at what they were doing as an individual contributor, but it doesn't mean that they would be as great as a leader. So those are the things sometimes that, yes, there is bias in the workplace around people who are a lot louder. And there are studies that have been done that support this. There was a study that was done that found that they surveyed senior executives, and they found that 65% of the senior executives said that they would not hire someone who's more introverted for leadership roles because they thought that introverts made bad leaders. So there have been studies that have been done over the years that support this as well, that there is a bias towards people who are louder and more extroverted when it comes to the workplace.
65% is huge. That's a
It
huge
is.
number. And when you think of sort of the endemic or systemic bias, it just builds in itself. Because if you're a leader, you probably were promoted into that, not only for your work, but because of your energy being more external. And it's funny, again, as I got older, and I think this just happens naturally. Like, I was the person who was like, yeah, team building, yeah, happy hours, yeah. I was part of something called the fun committee at one of my
Oh,
jobs.
wow.
And I was like, why would someone not want to participate in that? And as I've gotten older and become a manager, and having to really understand where people are coming from and understand their superpowers, that 65% makes a lot of sense. Like it has taken a lot of listening on my end to really understand some of that quiet leadership that you're talking about in a different way. And so how can people find their voice in these environments with loudmouths like me? Like how do you how do they find their voice, and is it an adjustment of energy or how do they manage their energy?
Okay, yes. So the first thing I want to say, I do want to acknowledge, like you said, you're a manager and you actually took the time to listen to understand people. And I do want to appreciate that because that's what I work with a lot of leaders to help them understand different perspectives. So I do want to acknowledge that you're already doing the work. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
That's great on you also. To your question, how do people do that? I think firstly, it's about recognizing your own strengths and appreciating them. Because a lot of times, because of this narrative around extroversion and how the workplace should be, people who are more on the quiet side don't value what they have to offer. So they don't value the listening skills that they have, they don't value the critical thinking skills they have because they're and I can give myself as an example, and I work with a lot of clients who go through this, but it's almost you get to the point that you start to wonder, is there something wrong with me?
Uh,
People around you are getting ahead, people around you are succeeding, and then you start to wonder, but maybe there is something wrong with me. Why am I not able to do that? Why, so then you start to compare and you wonder. But for me, what really changed was when I understood the strengths that I had to offer, and then I started leveraging them. So one of the things that I did, for example, I knew I was someone who is great at listening and kind of reading between the lines, like understanding what was missing. And when you're in an organization, ultimately ultimately what you're trying to do is solve any problem that they may have or identify needs so you can fill the gaps. So on one of the teams that I was on, I just would hear the more senior analysts talking about corporate reporting and how they hated corporate reporting and it took so much time and they're always complaining about it. So at the time I was a more junior analyst, but I said, okay, I'm going to try to learn anything I can learn about corporate reporting. And when opportunities came up, I would put my hand up like, hey, I can go to the meeting or I can participate. And it was through me just listening to what was going on and understanding, okay, there's a gap here. Maybe I can fill this gap. But just by taking that step, that seemed like it wasn't that much. It wasn't also a lot that was added to my workload because of it. But I went to one meeting where there was an executive who was building a new team and they were looking for people with corporate reporting expertise. I applied for that promotion, and that's how I landed a first promotion, and that was the first out of 5 promotions that I got in 8 years. So it was firstly about me recognizing that I do have value to offer, that I can participate and thrive in the workplace even as an introvert. So it starts firstly with you, that level of self-awareness of what you bring to the table and positioning your strengths so that it can work for the work environment that you're in.
Hmm. Absolutely. And 5 promotions in 8 years is pretty impressive. I mean, that's definitely knowing your strengths, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
and it doesn't feel like you were self-aggrandizing or had to really like promote yourself. It's just, hey, I've done this. I have the expertise, and you solve the need. And you've helped people land, like thousands of people land jobs in Fortune 500 companies and government. What do you think most professionals overlook when they try to stand out? What's something that maybe we get wrong about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the value of articulating your own story. Like now, the way we position it is you building your personal brand, but
Mhm.
ultimately, it's about having control over the narrative of your career and how you're positioning yourself as a professional or a leader. A
Mhm.
lot of times people aren't intentional about building that narrative of who they are, the strengths that they have. And what ultimately happens is that other people start assuming things, right? So they start creating this image or they start thinking, oh, this is the person who's this, and that's kind of how people get stuck in their careers. Like maybe you've been in a job for a long time and then people start to see you as that. They don't see you as anything else, but it's because you haven't been intentional about building a brand, about who you are, what your aspirations are, where do you see yourself in the organization. So based on a lot of the clients that I work with, often they're stuck in roles that they've been in the same position for a long time and they don't know how to take that next step or make a career change. And that's often the situation that they've just kind of let their career happen, but they've never actually intentionally said that I'm going to build a narrative around my career. This is where I want my career to go, or this is who I aspire to be, or who these are the people I need to talk to in order to make this transition. It's kind of just like let's go with the flow. And then when that can work sometimes at the beginning of your career, it can work, but you get to a point where, as especially when you're moving up in a big organization, the higher you're moving up, the less positions there are at those levels, right? So then you have to think about strategy. Then you have to think about building your personal brand. Then you have to think about who are the people who know me so that I can also continue to excel within this organization. So I would say that's the biggest mistake I see.
Yeah. And can you define how you view a personal brand?
hmm Yeah, a personal brand, it's an image, it's a perception, and also an impression that you're creating regarding yourself, your skills, your expertise within a larger marketplace.
Mhm.
So, a personal brand, it's not just something that you build online. I know right now there's a lot of conversation about build your personal brand, and on all platforms, like, for LinkedIn, it was like the main conversation for a while, but I'm seeing even like on Instagram and TikTok,
Right.
the whole personal branding aspect is becoming more dominant in on those platforms as well. But ultimately, it's about you controlling, or maybe controlling is not the best word, but you having it's your story, right? It's
Mhm.
your story,
Mhm.
it's your career, you telling the story instead of people assuming what the story is.
Mhm.
So if you're in marketing, being able to say that you're a marketing professional that focuses on this niche or this aspect of marketing, and kind of building a narrative around what it is that you do, so that, and the ultimate goal is always to be able to attract opportunities, but also so that like-minded people can find you when there is a need for your expertise. So the personal brand is one aspect, but what you're ultimately trying to do with your personal brand is build what we call top of mind awareness.
Mm.
And that's basically so that whenever, let's say, somebody is looking for a marketing manager or marketing leader, because you've been consistently building your personal brand, you are the first person they're going to think about when that opportunity arises. So that's what the goal of building your brand is, to create that kind of top of mind awareness.
And how does someone do that, especially as, we're in this age of social media influencers, and
Mhm.
not to knock social media influencers, but I'm constantly amazed. Like there's these influencers in, I think it's New York, who ate at this restaurant. Have you seen this? I think
No,
it's
I
Sima.
didn't.
So they ate at this top-rated restaurant and slammed it, or highly criticized it. And I was like, what's your expertise? Like what, how, you know what I mean? Like what, not that people don't want to see food reviews. I certainly do, but I was
Yes.
like, what makes you an expert on any of what you're tasting? So I think
Yeah.
the point of me saying that is not to criticize those influencers, but
Mhm.
there seems to be a lot of experts everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
how do you build a personal brand that feels authentic and not performative? And then
Yes.
also, you want to stay in your expertise lane, I would imagine, but also sort of be a Swiss Army knife in some ways, like be able to talk about maybe some of your fringe skills as well without overstepping. Can you talk to that a little bit about, I think really
Yeah.
more about the authenticity versus the performative nature?
Yes, I love that question because that's a conversation I have with a lot of my clients who are these quiet leaders who
Mhm.
aren't always very comfortable with putting themselves online, or they feel like, okay, I have to pretend to be someone else
Yeah.
online. And ultimately, no. And that's why I was saying it's about your story. Your story and your journey in your career is what's going to inform your personal
Mhm.
brand. So you're not here to pretend to be someone else. And people do that, but at the end of the day, you're going to find that it's going to be very time consuming, very exhausting to put on an image of, the person who's online versus who you are in reality. So really what you want to do is showcase aspects of your story, your subject matter expertise. You're an expert in a certain field as a professional.
Mhm.
You're sharing stories about that. You're sharing your insight, you're sharing your knowledge. Ultimately, you're really just showing who you are, and you decide where you want to draw the boundaries, because that's also another conversation I have often, that I don't want to put my whole life on social media, and you don't
Mhm.
have to. You
Mhm.
decide where you put the boundary, but it's really about deciding, okay, there's an area that you specialize in and conveying that message online. But the way to think about it is, what's the ultimate goal?
Mhm.
Like, that ultimate goal and your purpose for building your brand it will drive what kind of information you're sharing. It will also drive who will come and see that information. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, you build a brand for that purpose. So if at that time you're job searching, then you're building a brand around that. If you're trying to get clients as a business owner, the way you build your brand will be very different than someone who's currently job searching. Other people are building their brand, they just want to network, they just want to get the opportunity to meet new people. So depending on what the goal and the purpose is, that will also influence the way that you present yourself.
And do you find that generationally, like I'm a cusp Xer millennial, right? Like, do you find that different generations are more comfortable with this or present differently with their personal brand?
Hmm. It's a good question. I would say yes and no. Like, it kind
Mhm.
of depends on the person as well, because
Mhm.
I've seen some like younger people who are Gen Z who are like, yeah, I don't want to be on social either.
Yeah.
As much as they do consume content, they don't want to create it or put themselves out there.
Mhm.
And so I would say it kind of depends on the person. But ultimately, I would say the approach that we take to social media may be different from one generation generation to another, and then also the platforms that we're on,
Sure.
right? When it comes to personal branding, one thing that I would say, as I was saying, like your purpose ultimately will influence what you present, but it also will influence what platforms you're on, right? So
Mhm.
that also plays a big role. Like if you're building your personal brand on TikTok, your intentions could be different than if you decide to build your personal brand on LinkedIn, but they could be
Mhm.
the same as well, right? So keeping that in mind, what you want to do is to go where the people, like there are people that you're trying to attract, there's opportunities that you're trying to attract, go where those people hang out, because
Yeah.
that's what's going to help you to fulfill your ultimate purpose. So maybe they are on TikTok because you're selling something that aligns with that audience, but perhaps they could be on another platform as well. I know, like, I was working with an accountant recently, and as much as we created his LinkedIn profile and all that, we worked on that aspect of his brand. For him, he was telling me, like, in his industry, it's Facebook groups. Like, they have Facebook groups, and that's where they meet up, that's where they have conversations. I've had other people telling me, like, oh no, for us in our industry, it's more Slack. So
Mhm.
that depending on your industry, there may be places that are not the traditional social media that are where people hang out, and in person also still that's still a thing.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have a question about networking in person,
Okay.
but do you, some of it sort of, and maybe this is just personal and I shouldn't put it on other people, but it sounds like a little exhausting. It's like, okay, I'm putting all of this energy into work. I'm putting a lot of
Yeah.
thoughtfulness into work. And like I know I should be using LinkedIn way more than I do. I mean, I use LinkedIn a lot, but it's with clients, right? Like
Okay.
it's for the work itself. It's not like me talking about espousing about whatever.
Yes.
And then when I do think of something, I'm like, who's gonna read this? Like, who cares? And then sometimes I scroll. I was talking about this with other guests that I had, and I was
Yeah.
like, why are you talking about your wedding? Like, what's happening here? So I guess I say all of that. And I love what you said about like go where the network is, whether that's TikTok, whether that's Instagram, LinkedIn, like where Reddit, whatever, like go where your needs are. But how much should we be building an online brand? Sometimes I have to be honest, when I can't find anything about someone, I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like I can't find anything on you.
Find it cool.
Yeah, I'm just like,
Interesting.
wow, now I'm like really intrigued. I can't find anything on you. And there's
Yeah.
actually someone that I work with in a professional capacity. I
Mhm.
cannot figure out where they went to college. They
Mm.
have an incredible resume. It is not mentioned anywhere. And I really want to ask this person, it's deliberate. I mean, I can tell at
Yes.
this point
Yes.
it's deliberate. And I know they
Mhm.
went to college, not that, but I'm just like, what's going on there? I think it's so fascinating. So anyway, I mean, like how much should we, if we want to build an online presence, like how much attention should we be giving it?
Yeah, something I often tell my clients is that it's better that you have no presence at all, like you're mentioning now, than to have one that doesn't represent you well.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's often what people do. Like they'll create a LinkedIn profile and then they forget about it. And then there's information there from 10 years ago or from 15 years ago that's
Yeah.
inaccurate, right? But the issue with, maybe it's not an issue, but with something like LinkedIn, is that it ranks so high on SEO that if somebody does Google search you, 9 times out of 10, like the first three searches are going to be your LinkedIn profile. So
Mm-hmm.
it's always better that you have one that represents you well, as opposed to just saying, I created an account and I kind of forgot about it.
Right.
So that's one thing I just wanted to mention.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And then to your question specifically, again, you kind of said it when you were asking the question, like it depends. It really depends
Mm-hmm.
about how much time people can devote to it. I would say at a minimum, like if you know that you can't, you can't create content or that's not like something that you're interested in, I would say at a minimum have your LinkedIn profile and make sure that it's up to date. So
Mm-hmm.
that, especially if you're job searching, because people, they are like recruiters, hiring managers are going to look you up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's better at least to have a LinkedIn profile that's up to date. I would say that's the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And then, if you do have time to even like have some activity on your profile because that does help with searches specifically on LinkedIn. Recruiters who are using LinkedIn recruiting, that's one of the things like the fields that they can search in terms of activity. How active are you on the platform? So it can help in that
Hmm.
sense. But at the end of the day, I've seen people who have no online presence and they're still getting hired. Like they're
Hmm.
still working, they have jobs, they're, they're doing very well,
Right.
right?
Right.
So as much as it is helpful, it is not the only way. That's what I would say. And a
Yeah.
lot of times what I've seen with people who don't have strong online presences, they do have a strong network. Like they have
Yeah.
strong networks around them of professionals. If they are looking for a job, they know who they're going to. So that aspect, like that's what personal branding is all about, right? Because at the end of the day, people hire people, people buy from people. So if you're still doing an aspect of that, but maybe just not online, then yeah, go for it. There's
Right.
still value in that as well.
Right. I think it was Jeff Bezos who said like your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, which I think is like a
Ah,
really,
yes.
kind of an easy way, at least for me, to conceptualize that. And can you talk about networking and the not only the importance of, I'm going to say personal networking because it doesn't have to be face to face, it doesn't have to be in person. Um, but especially if you are a quiet leader and maybe you don't get as much energy from that interaction, how how do you suggest we build our networks? And what would you say to someone? Well, I'll let you answer the question. What's your approach to building networks?
Okay, so let's say, okay, networking generally, my approach is very much similar to the personal branding approach, where you want to attract opportunities instead of chasing them.
Hmm.
So for me, when I'm giving strategies to my clients in terms of how to position themselves when they're going to networking events or there are networking opportunities, is to work on getting people to come towards you. And that can be as simple as deciding to wear a bright color dress or a bright color shirt.
Hmm.
I often do that, and you go to an event because what I see is that I'm not the best at starting a conversation, but I'm great and I can sustain a conversation.
Hmm.
So if somebody kind of comes to me and removes that awkwardness,
Hmm.
then we can get the flow going and have the conversation. And for a lot of introverts, that's where we get stuck sometimes in our mind. Okay, what do I say? How are they going to respond? Will they say this? And then you start ruminating so much to the point that you just don't say anything and you lose the opportunity, right?
Hmm.
So somebody comes up to me and is like, "Oh, I love that shirt." And it's like, "Oh, thank you." And you kind of get the conversation going from there.
Right.
Or so that's one strategy that definitely works in terms of networking. I would say also don't overwhelm yourself because networking, it's not a numbers game. At the end of the day, how you're going to get value out of it is being able to build actual relationships. So
Hmm.
you're not there to collect business cards. And so if you can even just decide, I'm going to talk to 3 people and you know what kind of event it is, maybe there's already like a website. A lot of events these days, there's like, who the speakers are going to be,
Hmm.
you have a
Hmm.
lot of information. Sometimes, like I attended a networking event earlier this year and they even had a website where you could see who all the participants were.
That's
And
great.
so like you could set up like meetings ahead of time. So with all the resources that we have now, you can research who is it that I really want to talk to when I go to this event. And then you plan strategically. If you have that opportunity to even schedule meetings ahead of time, you
Mhm.
can do that. And that helps again with the energy management because then you can work around your time. Or you go to the event and you say, okay, my goal is to talk to 5 people, get their contact information. And then what will bring more value is the follow up
Mhm.
because that 2, 3 minutes that you had to interact with the person, you didn't go into a lot of detail, right? So the
Mhm.
follow up after the event, that's where you actually get more value. And that would be another piece of advice with networking is don't overwhelm yourself with the numbers or, going to big events. You need to talk to everybody. Just be more strategic about who you're going to talk to for what reason, and then always follow up. So yeah, those would be some of the
Yeah.
networking tips.
And I think what you mentioned about like getting over that first initial like awkwardness, I think it's also something we don't talk about often. Like networking is awkward. Like it's just
It is.
inherently part of it of
It
going up to a stranger and being like, "Hello," like, and even as someone who loves to talk to strangers, you got to get through that first part of it. Like, it's like a first date. It's like, I like purple. What color do you like? That kind of thing. And one of the things that has helped me, and if this helps listeners, great. I always approach it as like, even if it is awkward and we don't have anything in common, right? Like sometimes the energy's off or whatever. I always look at it, I always ask people like, have you watched any good movies or read any good books?
is.
And that not only kind of opens up conversations, I've gotten good recommendations from it. So I'm like, even if this doesn't end up being like, the most productive professional conversations, it's just something like a little thing for myself of like, oh, I used to say like, oh, have you been to any good concerts when I was younger or things like that. So I always have like a little thing that I'm like, okay, even if this is kind of a bust, let me get a book recommendation out of it
I
or
love
something.
it.
But it is inherently awkward, right? You're just walking
No,
up
I
to
completely
someone.
agree. It's super awkward.
Yeah,
Like,
or like
yeah.
even emailing someone is like, "Hello, I hope you're doing well. I would
Yeah.
love to." You're like, "Oh my God." And we all know what we're doing, right? And what would you say, like what are you seeing as the top leadership skills in demand right now and how it's sort of changing in the field?
Wow, that's a
Well,
good
all fields, but
question.
yeah.
Top leadership skills. I would say adaptability,
Mm.
especially right now with all the change that's going on with AI and remote work, hybrid work,
Hmm.
all the things happening from great resignation to now it's great unbossing. Like there's so much
What's the
going
great unbossing?
on. The great unbossing is basically like there are within organizations, they're getting rid of like a lot of middle management, like
Mm,
getting rid of a whole layer of management and creating flat organizations.
mm,
So yeah, that's the great unbossing. So there's a lot of change that has happened in the workplace in the last couple of years, but also people's approach to work has changed. Like people's understanding of work and the value that they have around work has changed, but a lot of organizations have not in terms of their
mhm.
approach. So that has almost created a bit of a disconnect. So I would say adaptability as a leader for sure is a must right
Yeah.
now. Another one I would say is just being self-aware. I think that's a huge skill that a lot of leaders miss.
Mhm.
And just once, and I kind of spoke to this a little bit when we were talking about introverts and the value of understanding yourself. But when you do understand yourself as a leader, generally, it just helps you with navigating different situations and approaching different people as well.
Mhm.
And it allows you also to know that, okay, in these situations, this is typically how I will react. So I know that when I talk to this person, like something triggers me, so I'll
Right.
adjust or I'll do, just that level of self-awareness, I feel like could avoid a lot of issues that we often encounter in the workplace. I would say those would be some of the key skills that I find important, but that even ties into a bit of like emotional intelligence, just having that ability to not, because as much as yes, the work is important, it's important to drive results. As much as the what is important, the how you do it is also important. And more, we're seeing that people are talking about the how. How do we work? How do we get
Mhm.
things done? How are we driving results? And so, if you are able to incorporate that in your leadership style as well, I think that that also adds a lot of value.
Yeah. And but as you were talking, I was thinking about our earlier the 65%
Yeah.
statistic that you gave and how there are systemic biases within organizations, whether it's related to extrovert versus introvert. Do you find that whether it's women or like individuals of color or any sort of group that's underrepresented, right? Like whatever that looks like for the industry or where you are, do you find that there is a difference in how we approach that, or is it really just getting back to what you said of like knowing yourself and being yourself? And I guess maybe what I'm asking is, how do you stay authentic in this process where I would imagine someone like me who's white with blonde hair gets viewed very differently, whether I am qualified or not for the role than
Yeah.
someone else. And that's just the reality sort of
Yes.
at least the industry I'm in and the country and area in the country that I'm in. Like, how do you stay authentic through this process, but also understand some of the biases that may exist from others who are in leadership positions?
This is from the perspective of the leader or like somebody who's trying to get
As
into
someone who's navigating it. Yeah.
someone navigating it. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Biases exist. Definitely. We're don't need to sugarcoat
Well,
that.
yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah, they exist. So I would say that for sure. For somebody who's trying to navigate it, I think what is important is that, when we acknowledge that they exist, that already is one step
Mhm.
in what we're doing. But then the other thing is not limiting yourself to certain opportunities or certain mindsets. And this is something that I work with a lot with I mentioned I'm in Canada. So
Mhm.
a lot of the people that I work with sometimes tend to be internationally trained professionals. And in Canada, there's this concept of Canadian experience. And a lot of workplaces want you to have Canadian experience on your resume before they even consider you. And that's part of the bias. But, when I'm working with my clients, something that I encourage them to do is not to undervalue what they bring to the table.
Mhm.
Because what tends to happen is because people have heard of this bias that exists around the Canadian experience and all that, they take off all their past experience from their resume. And then they
Mhm.
just put like one volunteering experience that they got when they arrived in Canada. And then it makes it seem like they have no experience at all. And so as much as yes the bias may exist, it doesn't mean that it needs to influence and dictate the way that you present yourself as a professional.
Mhm.
So see value in what you have to offer, and if their response is no, then maybe that's not the employer that you need
Right.
to work for. Maybe that's not the opportunity that you need to go after. So does it mean things will be more difficult? Yes, it may take
Mhm.
you a longer time, and that's unfortunately how the system is set up. But at the end of the day, I've seen incredible stories of people who come to Canada with experience from other countries, from international trained professionals who have like, sometimes like I see the level of experience that they're bringing to the country, and I'm like, why are you stuck in this job, right? But
Yeah.
they bring so much, and so but they are able to land an opportunity that aligns with their skills and their background. So, all that to say, as much as the biases may exist, don't let it limit you in terms of what you're trying to achieve, because the opportunity that will say yes is out there. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of you finding it. And kind of circling back to what we've been talking about since the beginning,
Mhm.
a personal brand can help you in that sense
Yeah.
because it opens the door to more opportunities. It opens the door to more people. It opens the door to a wider network that you may not have considered in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything that you said. And it was sort of a dumb question on my part as I think about it, because like you said, you don't want to adapt in an environment that isn't going to support you.
Yeah.
And my belief, and there's a lot of research that backs this up, diversity is our strength.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we get so caught in that idea of what you were saying, Canadian experience, it's like fit. Are they a fit? And that's a feeling,
Yeah.
and within feeling is so much opinion and subjective viewpoint that you're bringing. And when we open up to other people's experiences, backgrounds, thought processes, all types of diversity, it helps the organization as a whole. But you don't want to be somewhere that doesn't value that and value you. And I think as we do grow in leadership, however that looks in your organization, being open to that is so important too, like recognizing that and giving more people opportunities and space to be themselves and bring something new to the table. It's a really, I always sort of struggle with this idea of yes, bring your authentic self, and yes, you have great experience, and yes, diversity is a superpower.
Mhm.
And yet also within organizations we have frameworks, right? Like, and so we still have to like sort of play within these confines a little bit.
I would just add to what you're saying is that, as much as you're bringing your authentic self to work,
Hmm.
if you really think about it, like, okay, I'm a mom, I'm also a sister, I'm also a daughter. The way that I interact in those different settings is different, but
Yeah,
it's still me. It's
right.
not like changed who I am to a completely different person when I'm interacting with my son versus when I'm interacting with my sisters. It's still me, but because of the relationship, because of the history, because of what like the values around that, I may interact differently. I may speak differently. I speak French, so with my sisters I will speak French. So that's a different dynamic. And just to put that in context in the
Yeah.
work, as much as you're authentic, you're yourself, but there is a structure, there is as you said, a framework within those settings. So how can you still be yourself? How can you still bring the values, the yourself without changing who you are within whatever structure that is? And it's the same thing like when you go to the gym. I just went to the gym this
Mhm.
morning.
Yeah.
So, there's gym
Etiquette, right.
etiquette, yes. There's gym etiquette in terms of how you present yourself, what you do. Wait for the machine. Like that. That's
Right.
not, if you want to say I'm authentic, I just need to work out. Like, okay, like. So
Respect my authenticity. Get off the machine. Like,
so whatever setting you're in, there are
yeah.
certain let's like ways of interacting, ways of operating, but it doesn't mean that you're changing who you are in that setting.
So I want to brag on you a little bit. You've been named a LinkedIn top voice and one of Canada's top 100 Black women to watch. So first of all, congratulations
Thank
and
you.
all the success that you've had and will continue to have. But what does that recognition mean to you and how, if at all, does it drive you in your work?
Good question again. What does it mean to me? And we're talking about authenticity. So
Mhm.
for me, it doesn't mean a lot.
Yeah. Okay, middle child. Yes.
I think it's more the way people perceive me that has changed over time. Because I still feel like I'm the same person, even
Mhm.
after all the awards and recognition.
Mhm.
But then, even sometimes, like I'll go to an event. I was at an event last weekend and shared my LinkedIn QR code. And then, after the person scanned my QR code, they're like, "You have the blue check mark. You're at LinkedIn." It's like, okay,
Yeah.
how does that change? Like, we were having a great conversation, why has that changed? And then they now
Yeah.
brought other people in the conversation, like, look how many followers she has. She's a LinkedIn. And it
Wow.
just changed the dynamic. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think it's more how people perceive me that's different than how I see it. And yeah, that's how I would say what I
Yeah.
would say to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And are there any awards or recognitions that you are really hoping for or like not really driven by that type of
No, and
award?
it's not necessarily, there hasn't been any that I've seen that I'm like, I really want that
Hmm.
recognition. I think what I prefer awards that are like based on certain criteria that, okay, there was an established criteria and you were selected for this reason. I
Hmm.
don't really like awards that it's like, vote for me. And then it's this big competition of like, who got the most votes gets the award.
Right.
So I've been nominated for certain things that work in that voting system that I've just decided like I don't want to participate. But it does feel amazing to get recognized because a
Sure.
lot of time, as an entrepreneur, I'm working by myself, and you sometimes wonder, is this going anywhere? Is this making an impact? And to
Right.
sometimes get the email and be like, hey, you're getting recognized for this or you're being nominated for that, it does it does feel good to know that your work is making an impact and it's making a difference.
Mhm.
But it's not really something that I like look for. They tend to
Aspire
just
to.
come to me for some
Yeah.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because the work speaks for itself, and I think that
Yeah.
speaks to what you keep like the theme that keeps or the thread that keeps coming through this conversation is authenticity. And
Mm.
I think that
Yeah.
authenticity speaks for itself in the work that you're doing. So that's amazing. And your your work has been featured so many places. What do you hope resonates the most with people who are interacting with your content or hearing your message online or on TV or wherever they're getting it?
Yeah, it would be that as an introvert or a quiet leader, you can thrive. You can
Mhm.
thrive in your career, you can thrive in your social interactions. Like you can build an amazing career even as an introvert, and it shouldn't be seen as a weakness, but it's actually a huge strength. And we're talking about a lot of the changes that are going on in the workplace right now. And if you really look at they call them soft skills that people are looking for in the workplace for leadership when it comes to active listening skills or critical thinking. These are all skills that often introverts have innately
Mhm.
that are now, being developed as training courses for leaders and different things like that. So I would say, like, don't underestimate what you actually bring to the table, because even though it may not seem like it's something that is like the top skill that people are looking for in the workplace, it can still help you to navigate your career and succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious if you have if you have any like advice for people who want to make a career change and almost like aren't exactly sure what they want to do, right? Like, I think oftentimes we get so used to like, oh, this is what I do, and it's almost so automatic thinking
Mhm.
about those skills you have and like how you can transfer them. And I don't know that there's actually a question in here, but what have you seen? What have you seen, or what guidance have you given to people who want to make a career change to sort of take that inventory and then to explore what they want to do when they're not 100% sure exactly what they want to do? And I'm not talking about like, oh, I want to be a doctor. Like that's a
Yeah.
very, okay,
Yeah.
there's a prescription for that, but sort of like, oh, I've done this and now I think I want to try something else and I'm not 100% sure what that is.
Yeah, the word you use, inventory, is the perfect word because that's ultimately what you want to do. Kind of take an inventory of what you have to offer, your skills, your knowledge, your experience. I always encourage my clients to actually write them down, like write down what were your key accomplishments. From there is often like you may have an idea of what it is that you want to do, or you may have seen a job that someone is doing. Find out what are the requirements for that position. What experience are they looking for? Open job posters and actually analyze, okay, what's the requirement? And then what you want to do is matching. Like, what do I have? What are they looking for? And how can I bridge the gap? Because a lot of times people will think, I want to make a career change. I need to go back to school. I need to get
Mhm.
another degree. I need to get a certificate. But if you actually take the time to look at the requirements for the role that you may be considering, you may already have some of those skills. You may already have some of that experience. It's just about you repositioning it for this new industry in the language that they use or in how they're describing that experience. So it's really about finding out what you have to offer, what's needed for the position, and how do you bridge the gap.
So, the other thing that I think is so interesting is the changing job market. And I love
Mm.
what you said about like, don't discount your skills. And as you're looking in that inventory, I mean, look, I don't know your age. I'm 42. And I mean, the world looks totally different than what I thought the professional world would look like. And jobs are completely different, and how we do them and how we interact, even just this. I mean,
Yes.
it's funny, my friend Matt, who's been on the podcast a couple times, we were laughing about like we used to look for jobs in the newspaper. Like,
Yeah. Print
and
your resume
there's
and take it to the store. Yes.
yeah, and I remember one time I like faxed a resume to a job at work
Yes.
and he saw it and he was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I was like, it's so interesting how and I guess I'm going to speak to people who are sort of mid-career or later mid-career of like don't discount even that. Like our adaptability is so different just by nature of how long we've been doing whatever we've been doing than someone who's fresh out of college or things like that. So I love the idea of like taking an inventory, being adaptable and not discounting a lot of those soft skills that we bring to the table. So what advice would you give to your younger self?
The advice I would give to my younger self is to not be so fearful. So I feel
Mhm.
like when I was younger, like I would be so fearful to do certain things or present myself for opportunities. And it did kind of prevent me from being in spaces that I knew like I had the answer or I could do that job and just be out of fear. And that's kind of, my whole story about being an introvert. Initially I didn't know that I was an introvert,
Mhm.
but also I didn't I once I understood it, I was just like, oh yeah, it's because I'm shy. So, just always
Mm.
so I'm shy. But a lot of times it wasn't even that, it was just fear. Like I was just afraid to make the next move. It wasn't about personality, it wasn't about any of that. And I do see that a lot with my clients as well. You kind of create this mask around, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm too quiet, I can't do it. But
Right.
then it's like, is that really the issue? Or are you just afraid to put yourself out there? And
Mhm.
that's what I tend to see. And that's who I was, and that's what I tend to see a lot with my clients. So I would say don't let fear stop you.
Yeah. And how did you work through that? And it's going to be different for everybody, but like how did you recognize that and then start to make the change so that fear wasn't driving your actions?
Yeah, I would say very similar to what you said in the sense that it's not about ignoring it, but actually still taking action even with the fear.
Mhm.
And so even letting that fear kind of fuel you to take the next step, because a lot of times it's almost like, okay, this is unknown territory. I don't know what's going to happen when I get there. So your mind is almost trying to protect you from
Yeah.
the next step or the next situation. So for me, something that has really helped is just having that safety. What can I do so that I feel comfortable in this situation to take the next step? And then, depending on what it is, it's like, okay, now I feel good. I'm going to take the next step. But also something that has helped me is like I'm often in my mind, I'm often thinking I can drift off and just like create a whole movie in my head.
Yeah.
So I am like I imagine myself succeeding. Like I can visualize myself like being that person I want to be.
Yes.
And then I kind of create an identity of who this person is. And then I start acting like that,
Yes.
even where I am now, even if I'm not that person. And I feel like that helps me so much. Anytime that I feel that fear coming on, it's like I can just see myself, okay, this is where I'm going, this is who I'm going to be. And then I just start acting like that person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that everything has to come back to Beyonce, but like Sasha Fierce, right? Like I often
Yeah.
think about that, like, so that's very cool. And what do you love most about this work?
I love the transformations. I love being able to just like take people through a coaching program of like they're so fearful and so unsure about what's going to happen with their career. Are they going to be a good leader? Because a lot of the introverts I work with is to get into their first leadership role,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of hesitation about being a leader, and then seeing them 6 months later, a year later, and they're thriving. Like I was talking to a client that I worked with last year. She was telling me she's landed 2 promotions since we worked together, and I'm looking at her and she's super active on LinkedIn now. She's doing speaking engagements, like she's been in the
Amazing.
media. But this was someone like a year and a half ago when we were working together. She was so afraid to just even create, like we were working on an introduction post. It took her weeks. Just like quick hit
Oh
post,
yeah. Yeah.
you know? But yeah, just to see that transformation of where she is now, and she's doing what she always knew she could do, but there was something blocking her from actually taking that step. So for me, that's what brings me the greatest joy.
Yeah, that's really special to see and congrats to her for
Yeah.
doing it, but that's really amazing. And how can people find you and work with you?
Yeah, in terms of working together, my website is weapply.ca, and there's a link there. You can book a discovery call with me to
Mhm.
find out more about how we can help you make a career transition, land a promotion, or get into your first leadership role as an introvert. And another place you'll find me is LinkedIn. We've
Yeah.
talked about LinkedIn a lot today. So yes, Lissa with two S's, Appiah. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to chat, and I post there very regularly. So you'll find my content there and on YouTube as well.
Very cool. Thank you. And I have one more question, and I'm just curious about it. When you were a kid, how was leadership, like professional leadership, modeled to you or like explained to you? Because I always kind of laugh that like I was a kid of the 80s, 90s, and I feel like in my household it was always like Wall Street and suits and like be aggressive and like that sort of thing.
Yeah, it
You-
was that kind of command and
Yeah.
control kind of idea of who
Oh,
a leader
command and
is.
control. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah. And even like, when you said it, it's like the image that came to mind was a man. Like,
Hmm.
and we talked about race, so a white man, that's what
Yes.
came to mind.
Yeah, with
So,
like slicked back hair. Mine has slicked back hair.
and the suit and all that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the image. And I think that's what we thought a leader was at that time, right? But
Right.
now it's definitely evolved.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved. And thank you to all the people who didn't doubt themselves and knew
Yes.
themselves and gave us different models to see. Because I don't think that's necessarily how we see. I mean, I would not have believed you about women's sports in particular. Like, I would
Mm,
not have believed
yes.
you that I would have seen in my lifetime what we are seeing. And like, I just got chills. To your point, like people understanding who they are and what they bring to the table. And that sort of leadership is even just by doing it, inspiring
Yeah,
others. So it's,
leading by example.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you again. This has been such a fun conversation, and I hope that people find you because your content is really great. So
Oh,
whether it's on
thank you so
LinkedIn or
much.
YouTube or TikTok or wherever, so much value that you put out there for people. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the conversation.
Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.